The military transport truck came to a grinding halt as dust clouds swirled around its massive wheels. The engine made a loud hissing sound as it finally stopped after driving for 12 hours across the harsh desert terrain. Sarah Martinez sat in the back of the truck holding her sniper rifle case tight against her chest. Her uniform was soaked with sweat and her mouth felt dry as sandpaper. She could hear voices outside the truck. Male voices. Lots of them. They were talking and laughing about something, but she could not make out the exact words. Sarah took a deep breath and tried to calm her racing heart. She had been through this same situation 5 times before at different military bases. Each time it was the same story. Each time she had to prove herself all over again. The truck driver opened the back door with a loud bang. Bright sunlight poured in like a flood, making Sarah squint her eyes. She grabbed her gear bag with one hand and kept her rifle case in the other. As she jumped down from the truck, her boots hit the ground with a heavy thud. Sarah looked around and saw exactly what she had expected to see. 23 male soldiers were standing in a loose circle watching her every move. Some had their arms crossed over their chests. Others were shaking their heads slowly from side to side. A few were whispering to each other and pointing in her direction. The base looked like every other forward operating base she had seen. Concrete barriers everywhere. Guard towers at each corner. Rows of small buildings that served as sleeping quarters and offices. Everything was covered in a thin layer of desert dust that made the whole place look brown and gray. Sergeant Brooks stepped forward from the group of soldiers. He was a tall man with thick arms and a face that looked like it had seen too much combat. His eyes were cold as he looked Sarah up and down like she was some kind of strange animal that had wandered into their territory. "Great, they sent us a girl," Brooks said in a loud voice that everyone could hear. He did not try to hide his disappointment. Several soldiers behind him started laughing and making jokes. Sarah heard one of them say something about playing house in the middle of a war zone. Sarah kept walking toward the group even though every muscle in her body wanted to turn around and get back in that truck. She had learned long ago that showing any sign of weakness would make things 10 times worse. Her face remained calm and neutral, even though her stomach felt like it was full of angry butterflies. She had been the only woman in her sniper training class 2 years ago. Out of 40 students, she had graduated 3rd overall and 1st in long-distance accuracy. But none of that seemed to matter when she arrived at a new base. All these men could see was that she was different from them. Another soldier with Sergeant Stripes walked up to Brooks and whispered something in his ear. Both men looked at Sarah and started laughing. The second sergeant was shorter than Brooks but had the same mean look in his eyes. His name tag read Thompson, and he had a scar running down the left side of his face. "I heard they were sending us," a replacement sniper Thompson said loud enough for everyone to hear. "But nobody told us it would be Barbie with a rifle." More laughter erupted from the group. Some soldiers were now openly staring and making comments to each other. Sarah continued walking until she was about 10 feet away from the group. She set down her gear bag but kept hold of her rifle case. The desert wind picked up and blew sand across the open area between the buildings. The temperature had to be over 100 degrees, but Sarah refused to wipe the sweat from her forehead. Captain Williams finally appeared from one of the buildings. He was older than most of the other soldiers with gray hair at his temples and lines around his eyes that spoke of many years in combat zones. He walked with the confident stride of someone used to being in charge. "Welcome to Alpha Company," Corporal Martinez Williams said as he approached her. His handshake was firm, but Sarah could see uncertainty in his eyes. She had seen that same look before from other commanding officers. They were not sure what to do with a female soldier in a combat zone. "Thank you, sir," Sarah replied in a clear, strong voice. "I am ready to get started and contribute to the mission." She made sure to look Williams directly in the eyes when she spoke. Her father had taught her that people respected others who could look them in the face without backing down. "I hope you are ready for the real deal out here," Williams said. His tone suggested that he had serious doubts about her ability to handle combat situations. The way he emphasized the words "real deal" made it clear that he thought her previous experience did not count for much. "Ready as always," Sir Sarah answered without hesitation. She had learned to keep her responses short and professional. Arguing or trying to explain her qualifications usually made things worse in these situations. Brooks stepped closer to Williams and spoke in a voice that was meant to sound like a whisper, but was actually loud enough for everyone to hear. "Sir, with all due respect, I think there might have been some kind of mistake. We requested an experienced sniper to replace Johnson. We need someone who can handle the pressure out here." "Corporal Martinez comes highly recommended," Williams replied, though his voice lacked conviction. "She has completed 3 previous deployments and has excellent marksmanship scores." But even as he said these words, Sarah could tell that he was trying to convince himself as much as he was trying to convince Brooks. The group of soldiers continued to stare at Sarah like she was some kind of circus act. She could hear more whispered comments and barely contained laughter. One soldier near the back of the group made a comment about how she would probably cry the first time someone shot at her. Sarah had dealt with this kind of treatment before, but it never got any easier. These men were supposed to become her brothers in arms. They were supposed to have her back in dangerous situations and trust her to have theirs. Instead, they were treating her like an unwelcome guest at a private party. The sun was beating down mercilessly, and Sarah could feel sweat running down her back under her heavy uniform, but she stood perfectly still with her shoulders straight and her chin up. She would not give these men the satisfaction of seeing her show any discomfort or weakness. "Your quarters are in Building C," Williams said, pointing to a small concrete structure about 50 yards away. "You will be sharing with Corporal Davis, who is currently out on patrol. Chow is at 1800 hours and morning formation is at 0600. Sarah nodded and picked up her gear bag. As she started walking toward Building C, she could hear the soldiers behind her starting to talk again. Their voices were no longer whispered, and she could make out most of what they were saying. "This is going to be a disaster," one voice said. "How are we supposed to focus on fighting when we have to worry about babysitting?" Another voice added that having a woman around was going to ruin unit cohesion and make everyone soft. Sarah kept walking without looking back. She had heard all of these arguments before at her previous assignments. Some of the men eventually came around once they saw her in action. Others never stopped treating her like she did not belong. She had learned to focus on the mission and let her performance speak for itself. As she reached the door to Building C, Sarah allowed herself one quick look back at the group of soldiers. They were still watching her and talking among themselves. She knew that every move she made from this moment forward would be scrutinized and judged more harshly than any male soldier would face. But Sarah Martinez had not come this far by giving up when things got difficult. She had survived sniper school, where instructors tried to break her spirit daily. She had completed 3 combat deployments where she proved her skills under fire. She had earned her place in this unit whether these men wanted to admit it or not. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Tomorrow she would start the long process of earning their respect one shot at a time. Tonight she would unpack her gear, write a letter to her sister, and prepare for whatever challenges lay ahead. Sarah opened the door to Building C and stepped inside. The battle for acceptance had begun, and she had no intention of losing. The morning sun was barely visible over the desert mountains when Sarah heard the loud sound of boots marching outside her building. She had been awake since 4:30 in the morning, cleaning her rifle and checking her equipment. Sleep had not come easily on her first night at the new base. The thin mattress felt like concrete, and the air conditioning unit made strange noises all night long. Sarah quickly put on her uniform and grabbed her gear. She knew that being late for morning formation would give the other soldiers another reason to criticize her. As she stepped outside the building, she could see the entire unit forming neat rows in front of the main headquarters building. Captain Williams stood at the front of the formation with a clipboard in his hands. Sergeant Brooks was walking up and down the rows, checking uniforms and making sure everyone was standing properly. When Brooks saw Sarah approaching, he looked at his watch and shook his head like she was already causing problems. "Fall in, Martinez," Brooks called out in a harsh voice. Sarah took her place at the end of the back row next to a young soldier who looked like he was barely old enough to shave. The soldier glanced at her nervously but did not say anything. After morning formation, Williams made an announcement that made Sarah's stomach tighten with anxiety. "Today we will be conducting marksmanship training at the rifle range. All personnel will demonstrate their shooting skills with standard-issue weapons. This is not optional, and everyone will be evaluated." Sarah could hear several soldiers behind her making quiet comments about how this would be interesting. Someone whispered that they would finally get to see if the girl could actually shoot, or if her reputation was just based on paperwork and political correctness. The rifle range was located about half a mile from the main base. It consisted of several concrete firing positions with metal targets set up at different distances. The closest targets were at 200 meters, but the furthest ones were at 800 meters. That was the distance that separated good shooters from truly exceptional ones. Brooks walked over to the weapons rack and picked up a standard-issue M24 sniper rifle. It was clean and well-maintained, but Sarah could tell immediately that it was not properly zeroed for long-distance shooting. Brooks handed her the rifle with a smirk on his face. "Let's see what the lady can do," Brooks announced loud enough for everyone to hear. He was clearly hoping that she would fail in front of the entire unit. Sarah took the rifle and examined it carefully. The scope was slightly loose and the bipod legs were not the same length. "Sergeant, this weapon has not been properly maintained," Sarah said in a professional voice. "The scope needs to be tightened and the bipod should be adjusted before anyone attempts long-range shots with it." Brooks' face turned red with anger. "Are you questioning my weapon maintenance, Martinez?" he asked in a threatening tone. "That rifle was cleaned yesterday and it shoots perfectly fine. Maybe the problem is not with the weapon." Several soldiers started laughing and making comments about how she was already making excuses before even taking a shot. Sarah realized that Brooks had deliberately given her a weapon that would be difficult to shoot accurately. This was a setup designed to make her fail. "The weapon is fine, sir," Sarah replied calmly. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her argue or complain. Instead, she would work with what she had been given and let her skills speak for themselves. The target was set at 800 meters, which was a challenging distance even for experienced snipers. Sarah took her position on the concrete firing line and adjusted the rifle as best she could. The wind was blowing from the southeast at about 12 miles per hour, and she would need to compensate for that in her aim. 20. 3 pairs of eyes were focused on her back as she settled into her shooting position. Sarah could hear whispered conversations behind her, but she forced herself to block out all distractions. She had learned long ago that successful shooting required complete mental focus. Sarah controlled her breathing and studied the target through the scope. The crosshairs were slightly blurry because of the loose scope mount, but she could still make out the center of the target. She calculated the wind drift and adjusted her point of aim accordingly. The first shot rang out across the desert with a sharp crack that echoed off the nearby mountains. Sarah kept her eye on the scope and watched as the bullet struck the target dead center. A small puff of dust marked the exact point of impact. The talking behind her stopped immediately. Sarah could hear Brooks walking closer to get a better look at the target through his binoculars. She chambered another round and prepared for her second shot without changing her position. The second bullet hit within inches of the first one, creating a tight group at the center of the target. By now, the entire firing line had gone completely silent. Sarah continued shooting with mechanical precision, placing 5 shots within a circle smaller than a coffee cup. When she finished shooting, Sarah stood up and handed the rifle back to Brooks. His face had gone from confident smugness to shocked disbelief in the span of 5 minutes. Several soldiers were looking through binoculars at the target and shaking their heads in amazement. Beginner's luck called out Thompson from somewhere behind her, but his voice lacked the confidence it had carried the day before. Sarah turned around and looked directly at him with a slight smile on her face. "Maybe next time you can show me how it's really done," Sergeant Sarah said in a calm voice. The challenge was clear, and everyone on the firing line understood what she was suggesting. Thompson would now have to put his own reputation on the line. Brooks stepped forward and took a shooting position with the same rifle Sarah had just used. He was clearly angry and embarrassed by her performance. His face was red and Sarah could see sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool morning air. The first shot from Brooks missed the target completely. A small cloud of dust appeared in the dirt about 3 feet to the left of the target. He angrily chambered another round and fired again. This shot hit the target but was nowhere near the center. By the time Brooks finished shooting his 5 rounds, they were scattered across the target like leaves blown by the wind. The best shot was about 6 inches from the center, and the worst one was barely on the target at all. Thompson stepped up next, and his results were no better than Brooks. His shots formed a loose pattern around the outer edges of the target. One shot missed completely and hit the dirt bank behind the target with a loud thump. Sarah watched as soldier after soldier took their turn at the 800-meter target. Some were decent shots who managed to hit the target consistently, Others struggled to hit it at all, but none of them came close to matching her tight group at the center. When the shooting was finished, Williams walked down the firing line to examine all the targets. He spent a long time looking at Sarah's target through his binoculars. When he finally lowered the binoculars, his expression was thoughtful and perhaps slightly impressed. "Outstanding shooting," Martinez Williams said loud enough for everyone to hear. "That is some of the finest marksmanship I have seen at this range." Sarah felt a small surge of satisfaction, but she kept her expression neutral and professional. "Thank you, sir," she replied simply. Sarah knew that acknowledging the compliment too enthusiastically would be seen as boastful or arrogant by the other soldiers. The walk back to the base was much quieter than the walk to the range had been. Sarah could feel the other soldiers looking at her differently now. The open mockery had stopped, but it had been replaced by something that might have been even worse. Cold silence. She had proven that she could shoot better than any of them, but instead of earning their respect, she seemed to have made them even more resentful. Sarah realized that showing up the men in front of their peers might have been necessary, but it had also painted a bigger target on her back. That evening at dinner, Sarah sat alone at a table in the corner of the mess hall. She could see the other soldiers sitting together at their usual tables, talking and laughing. Occasionally, one of them would glance in her direction, but no one made any move to include her in their conversations. Brooks walked past her table carrying his dinner tray. As he passed, he leaned down and spoke quietly so only she could hear. "Nice shooting today, Martinez. But shooting at paper targets is not the same as shooting at people who are shooting back at you." Sarah looked up at him with steady eyes. "I guess we will find out about that when the time comes, Sergeant," she replied. Brooks stared at her for a moment longer, then continued walking to his table without saying anything else. As Sarah finished her dinner alone, she realized that her real challenge was just beginning. She had proven she could shoot, but now she needed to prove that she belonged with these men in combat. The next test would be much harder than hitting a paper target at 800 meters. 3 weeks had passed since the shooting demonstration at the rifle range, and Sarah felt more alone than ever before in her military career. The outstanding marksmanship she had displayed instead of earning respect had somehow made the other soldiers treat her even worse than before. It was as if her success had threatened something deep inside them that they could not put into words. Every morning, Sarah woke up before dawn in her small concrete room. Her roommate, Corporal Davis, had returned from patrol the day after she arrived, but he barely spoke to her except when absolutely necessary. He would grunt good morning if she was lucky, and then quickly leave to join the other soldiers for breakfast. Sarah had started eating her meals alone in the corner of the mess hall. The first few days she had tried sitting at different tables with groups of soldiers, but the conversations would stop the moment she approached. Men who had been laughing and telling stories would suddenly become very interested in their food when she sat down. The isolation was not just limited to meal times. During training exercises, Sarah found herself assigned to tasks that kept her away from the main group. When the unit practiced room-clearing techniques, she was told to stay outside and provide security. When they worked on vehicle maintenance, she was assigned to inventory supplies in a different building. Captain Williams seemed uncomfortable whenever he had to give her assignments. He would avoid making eye contact and speak to her in short, clipped sentences, as if spending too much time talking to her might somehow contaminate him. Sarah could tell that he was under pressure from his senior enlisted men to keep her separated from the main unit. Sergeant Brooks had become especially creative in finding ways to exclude her from important training. During map-reading exercises, he would pair everyone else with partners but tell Sarah to work alone. When the unit practiced radio communication, she was given a broken radio and told to figure out how to fix it while everyone else conducted actual training. But Sarah refused to let their treatment break her spirit. Every morning after the other soldiers finished their physical training, she would go to the small gym by herself and work out for an additional hour. She ran longer distances than anyone else in the unit and could do more push-ups than most of the men, but none of them seemed to care about her physical fitness. In the afternoons when the heat became unbearable, Sarah would find a quiet spot behind one of the buildings and practice with her rifle. She had memorized every detail of the terrain around their base and could identify landmarks at distances up to 1,500 meters. Her shooting skills continued to improve even though no one bothered to notice. The worst part of each day was the evening when all the soldiers would gather in the recreation room to play cards or watch movies. Sarah could hear them laughing and telling stories about their families back home. Sometimes she would stand outside the building listening to the sound of men who trusted each other, completely sharing their hopes and fears. Sarah tried to join them exactly 3 times. The first time she walked into the recreation room and asked if she could play cards with them. The game stopped immediately and several men made excuses about being tired and needing to get some sleep. Within 5 minutes, the room was empty except for her. The second time she tried to watch a movie with the group. She sat in the back row and did not say anything to disturb them. But throughout the entire movie, she could feel their eyes on her instead of the screen. After 30 minutes, she quietly left and went back to her room. The third and final time she attempted to join their evening activities was during a discussion about home. One soldier was showing pictures of his new baby daughter, and everyone was gathered around looking at the photos. Sarah approached the group and mentioned that her sister had just had a baby too. The man with the pictures looked up at her with cold eyes and said that he was only sharing personal information with people he trusted. The message was clear and brutal. Sarah was not considered trustworthy enough to be part of their family conversations. After that third rejection, Sarah stopped trying to join their social activities. Instead, she spent her evenings writing letters to her sister back home. She never mentioned the loneliness or the way she was being treated by her fellow soldiers. Her letters were always positive and focused on the mission. "The desert is beautiful at sunset," she would write, when what she really wanted to say was that she felt like she was disappearing a little bit more each day. "The training is challenging and rewarding," she would tell her sister, when the truth was that she was being excluded from most of the meaningful training. Exercises. Sarah also spent her free time studying intelligence reports and tactical manuals. She memorized the names and backgrounds of every known insurgent leader in their area of operations. She learned about local customs and political situations that might affect their missions. Knowledge was the one thing that no one could take away from her. During the 4th week, something unexpected happened that gave Sarah a small glimmer of hope. Private Jackson approached her table during lunch. He was the youngest member of the unit at barely 19 years old, and he looked nervous as he walked over to where she was sitting, alone. "Corporal Martinez Jackson," said in a quiet voice while glancing around to make sure no one was watching them. He sat down across from her but kept his voice so low that she had to lean forward to hear him properly. "I wanted to tell you that the shooting you did last week at the range was the most incredible marksmanship I have ever seen," Jackson whispered. His young face was sincere, and Sarah could tell that it had taken courage for him to approach her. "Thank you, Jackson," Sarah replied with the first genuine smile she had worn in weeks. "That means more than you know." She kept her voice equally quiet, because she did not want to get the young soldier in trouble with the others. "Have been in this unit for 8 months, Jackson continued, and I have never seen anyone shoot like that, not even Sergeant Brooks, and he thinks he is the best marksman in the company." Jackson paused and looked around nervously again before continuing. "Some of the guys are saying that you got lucky, or that the targets were set up wrong," Jackson said. "But I was watching through binoculars and I saw every shot. There was no luck involved. That was pure skill." Sarah felt a warmth in her chest that she had not experienced since arriving at the base. Finally, someone had acknowledged what she had accomplished without trying to diminish it or explain it away. It was just one person, but it felt like a victory. "I appreciate you saying that," Sarah told Jackson. "It takes guts to speak up when everyone else is going along with the crowd." Jackson blushed slightly at the compliment, but he seemed pleased that she had noticed his courage. The conversation lasted only a few more minutes because Jackson was clearly worried about being seen talking to her for too long. But as he got up to leave, he made a promise that gave Sarah more hope than she had felt in weeks. "If you ever need someone to watch your back out there," Jackson said quietly, "I want you to know that you can count on me. I do not care what the others think. Good soldiers are good soldiers regardless of anything else." After Jackson left, Sarah finished her lunch with a slightly lighter heart. She was still eating alone and she was still being excluded from most unit activities. But now she knew that at least one person in the unit saw her as a fellow soldier, rather than as an unwelcome outsider. That evening, Sarah wrote a different kind of letter to her sister. For the first time, she mentioned that she had made a friend at her new assignment. She did not go into details about the challenges she was facing, but she did write that sometimes it only takes one person believing in you to make all the difference. As Sarah prepared for bed that night, she thought about Private Jackson and his words of support. She realized that earning the respect of 23 men all at once might be impossible, but earning the respect of one good soldier at a time was something she could work with. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to prove herself. Sarah was determined to continue showing up every day and doing her job to the best of her ability. Eventually, others might follow Jackson's example and judge her based on her actions rather than their prejudices. The battle for acceptance was far from over, but Sarah Martinez had won her first small victory. One ally in a unit of 24 men was not much, but it was a beginning. And sometimes that is all a person needs to keep fighting. The emergency alarm rang out across the base at 0400 hours on a Tuesday morning. Sarah jolted awake in her narrow bed as the loud, piercing sound cut through the darkness like a knife. Red warning lights were flashing outside her window, and she could hear soldiers running between the buildings shouting orders to each other. Sarah quickly threw on her uniform and grabbed her gear. Emergency alarms at this hour usually meant that intelligence had come in about a time-sensitive target. These were the missions that could not wait for proper planning and preparation. These were the missions where soldiers proved their worth or paid the ultimate price. When Sarah reached the briefing room, she found it packed with every member of Alpha Company. Captain Williams stood at the front of the room next to a large map of the surrounding area. His face was grim, and Sarah could tell immediately that this was not going to be a routine patrol or training. Exercise, Gentleman Williams began, then caught himself and glanced at Sarah. Personnel we have received. Intelligence about a high-value target that requires immediate action. The man we have been hunting for 3 months has finally made a mistake. The target was Ahmad Hassan, a notorious insurgent leader who had been responsible for the deaths of dozens of American soldiers over the past 2 years. Intelligence sources had confirmed that Hassan was meeting with his top lieutenants at a remote compound 12 kilometers northeast of their base. The meeting is scheduled to take place at dawn, Williams continued while pointing to a location on the map. This gives us a narrow window of opportunity to capture or eliminate Hassan before he disappears back into the mountains for another 3 months. Sarah studied the map carefully while Williams explained the tactical situation. The compound was located in a valley surrounded by rocky hills that provided excellent positions for sniper overwatch. The main building was made of concrete and had limited entry points, which would make assault difficult, but not impossible. This is a target that could save dozens of American lives if we are successful, Williams said. Hassan has been planning attacks on supply convoys and forward operating bases throughout this region. Taking him out of action permanently would deal a significant blow to insurgent operations. Sergeant Brooks raised his hand and asked about the composition of the assault team. Williams looked at his notes and began reading off the names of soldiers who would be part of the main attack force. Sarah listened carefully but did not hear her name mentioned in any of the assault elements. Martinez, Williams said, suddenly causing Sarah to sit up straighter in her chair. You will provide sniper overwatch from the ridge overlooking the compound. Your job will be to eliminate any sentries and provide real-time intelligence on enemy movement. Sarah felt her heart rate increase as the significance of the assignment hit her. This was not busy work designed to keep her out of the way. This was a critical combat role that would put her skills to the ultimate test. For the first time since arriving at the base, she was being trusted with a mission that truly mattered. Sir Sergeant Brooks interrupted with obvious concern in his voice. Would it not be better to have Thompson on overwatch? He knows these mountains better than anyone and has more experience in this type of terrain. The room fell silent as everyone waited for Williams to respond. Sarah could feel 23 pairs of eyes watching to see if the captain would change his mind and replace her with a male soldier. This was the moment that would determine whether all her training and preparation had been worthwhile. Martinez has the best marksmanship scores in the unit, Williams said, after what felt like an eternity of silence. She demonstrated exceptional accuracy at 800 meters, and this mission requires precision shooting. She takes overwatch. Sarah felt a surge of pride mixed with overwhelming pressure. This was the first time since her arrival that anyone in command had publicly acknowledged her superior skills. But she also knew that if she failed or made a mistake, every person in this room would use it as proof that women did not belong in combat units. The briefing continued for another 30 minutes, as Williams explained. The details of the operation. The main assault team would approach the compound from the east using natural terrain features for concealment. A secondary team would block potential escape routes to the south, while Sarah provided overwatch from the north. Sarah memorized every detail of the mission plan. She studied the satellite photos of the target area until she could visualize every building and rock formation. She identified the best shooting positions and calculated distances to various points around the compound. Her life and the lives of her teammates would depend on this preparation. When the briefing ended, Williams dismissed everyone except for the team leaders and Sarah. He wanted to go over the overwatch position in more detail and discuss communication procedures. This was standard practice, but Sarah noticed that several soldiers gave her hostile looks as they filed out of the room after the others left. Williams spread a detailed topographical map on the table and pointed to a rocky outcrop 400 meters north of the target compound. "This is your position, Martinez," he said. "You will have clear fields of fire covering the entire target area from this location." Sarah studied the map carefully and asked several tactical questions about enemy strength and expected resistance. Williams answered her questions professionally, but she could still sense uncertainty in his voice. He was giving her this critical assignment, but he was not completely confident in his decision. The operation would begin in 18 hours, which gave Sarah time to prepare her equipment and study the target area one final time. She spent the rest of the morning cleaning her rifle and checking every piece of gear she would need for the mission. There could be no equipment failures or oversights that might compromise the operation. That afternoon, Sarah went to the rifle range by herself to verify that her weapon was properly zeroed. She fired 10 rounds at targets set at various distances to make sure her scope was perfectly adjusted. Every shot hit exactly where she aimed, confirming that her rifle was ready for combat. As evening approached, Sarah found herself thinking about Private Jackson and his words of encouragement. He had told her that good soldiers were good soldiers regardless of anything else. Tomorrow she would have the opportunity to prove that his faith in her was justified. Sarah ate dinner alone as usual, but tonight the isolation felt different. Instead of being excluded from something important, she was preparing for the most critical mission of her career. She was no longer just trying to fit in with the unit. She was getting ready to save lives. The weight of responsibility was enormous. If Hassan escaped because of a mistake she made, the consequences would be measured in American casualties over the coming months. If she missed a critical shot at the wrong moment, her teammates could die in the assault. Success or failure would rest largely on her shoulders. That night, Sarah wrote what might be her final letter to her sister. She did not mention the dangerous mission she would be undertaking in a few hours, but she did write about how grateful she was for her family's support throughout her military career. She sealed the letter and placed it on her small desk where it would be found if she did not return. Sarah tried to sleep, but her mind kept reviewing every aspect of the mission plan. She visualized herself in the overwatch position, scanning the target area through her rifle scope. She practiced in her mind the radio calls she would make to coordinate with the assault teams. She imagined various scenarios that might develop and how she would respond to each one. Finally, exhaustion overcame her anxiety and Sarah fell into a light sleep filled with dreams of rocky mountains and concrete buildings. Tomorrow would determine whether months of isolation and criticism had been worth enduring. Tomorrow she would either prove herself as a valuable member of the team or confirm every doubt that had been expressed about her capabilities. When Sarah woke up 3 hours before dawn, she felt calm and focused. The nervousness was gone, and in its place was the cold determination of a professional soldier preparing for combat. She had trained for this moment her entire career, and now it was time to show everyone what she was capable of accomplishing. The pre-dawn darkness was thick as black velvet when Sarah crawled into her final position on the rocky ridge overlooking the target compound. She had been moving through the desert terrain for 2 hours using night vision goggles to navigate around boulders and avoid loose rocks that might give away her location. Every step had been calculated and silent. Sarah settled behind a large boulder that provided perfect concealment, while giving her an unobstructed view of the entire target area 400 meters below. Through her rifle scope, she could see the concrete buildings of the compound spread out like a miniature village in the valley. Dim lights glowed in 2 of the windows, indicating that people were awake and moving around inside. The morning air was cold against her face, but Sarah knew that within a few hours the desert heat would become almost unbearable. She adjusted her position slightly to make sure she would be comfortable for what might be a very long wait. Her rifle was steady on its bipod, and she had spare ammunition arranged within easy reach. Sarah keyed her radio and spoke in a whisper that was barely audible even to herself. Overwatch in position, she reported to Captain Williams, who was coordinating the entire operation from the base. All teams acknowledged her transmission, confirming that communication was working properly. Through her scope, Sarah began a systematic survey of the target compound. She could see 4 buildings arranged around a central courtyard, with several vehicles parked near the main entrance. The largest building appeared to be where the meeting would take place based on the intelligence reports they had received. 2 armed guards were visible on the roof of the main building. They were walking back and forth in a patrol pattern that repeated every 3 minutes. Sarah timed their movements carefully and noted that there was a brief moment when both guards would be facing away from the northern approach route. A third guard was positioned near the vehicle compound on the eastern side of the complex. This man seemed more alert than the rooftop sentries, and he kept scanning the surrounding hills with binoculars. Sarah made a mental note that this guard would need to be eliminated first if shooting became necessary. The 4th guard was conducting a mobile patrol around the entire perimeter of the compound. He would disappear behind buildings for several minutes at a time before reappearing in a different location. His unpredictable movement pattern would make him the most difficult target to engage if combat broke out. "Overwatch, this is Alpha Leader," came the voice of Captain Williams through her earpiece. "We are moving into position now. Report any changes in enemy activity." Sarah acknowledged the transmission and continued her careful observation of the target area. Sarah could see the assault team moving through the desert terrain below her position. They were using a dry riverbed for concealment as they approached the compound from the east. Even through her powerful scope, she could barely make out their dark shapes against the rocky ground. The secondary team was also in motion, moving to block the southern escape routes. These soldiers would prevent any insurgents from fleeing toward the mountains if the main assault team was discovered before reaching the compound. Everything was proceeding according to the mission plan. As Sarah watched the careful movements of her teammates, she felt a strange mix of pride and anxiety. These were the same men who had mocked her and excluded her from their brotherhood. But now she was in a position where their lives might depend on her skills and judgment. The irony was not lost on her. "Alpha Leader, we have movement in the main building," came another voice over the radio. Sarah immediately focused her scope on the windows of the largest structure. She could see shadows moving behind the curtains, and occasionally a figure would pass in front of a lighted window. "I confirm movement in the main building," Sarah reported. "Multiple individuals visible, but I cannot get a clear count from this angle." She continued watching as more activity became apparent throughout the compound. It appeared that the meeting was beginning earlier than intelligence had predicted. Suddenly, Sarah spotted something that made her blood run cold. 6 additional armed men were moving through a concealed position northwest of the compound. They were using a dried-up stream bed for cover and would be completely invisible to the assault teams approaching from the east. "Alpha Leader, this is Overwatch," Sarah transmitted urgently. "I have 6 additional hostile contacts moving to flank your position from the northwest. They are approximately 200 meters from the compound and closing on your location." The radio crackled with static for a moment before Williams responded. "Overwatch, confirm those contacts. We do not have visual on any flanking movement." Sarah could hear the skepticism in his voice, and she knew that some of the team members would be questioning whether she was seeing things that were not really there. "Alpha Leader, I have positive identification of 6 armed individuals using the northern streambed for concealment," Sarah replied with professional calm, despite the urgency of the situation. "They are carrying AK-47 rifles and what appears to be at least 1 rocket-propelled grenade launcher." Sarah watched through her scope as the flanking force continued to move closer to her teammates. The lead insurgent was now carrying an RPG and appeared to be looking for the best position to engage the American assault team. In just a few minutes, he would have a clear shot that could kill or wound multiple soldiers. "Overwatch, we still do not have visual confirmation," came the voice of Sergeant Brooks over the radio. "Are you certain about these contacts?" Sarah could hear the doubt in his voice, and she realized that the same skepticism that had plagued her since arriving at the base was now potentially putting lives at risk. Brooks was questioning her report just as he had questioned everything else she had done since joining the unit. But this time his refusal to trust her judgment could result in the death of American soldiers. Sarah felt anger building in her chest, but she forced herself to remain professional and calm. Alpha Leader. The flanking force is now 150 meters from your position, Sarah transmitted. The lead individual is carrying an RPG and is moving into firing position. You need to adjust your approach immediately or you will be caught in a crossfire. Sarah could see that the assault team was continuing to advance toward the compound, apparently unaware of the deadly trap that was being set for them. The insurgents in the flanking position had perfect concealment and would be able to attack the Americans from their blind spot. Through her scope, Sarah watched as the insurgent with the RPG found a position behind a large boulder that gave him a clear field of fire toward the approaching assault team. He was now less than 100 meters from Brooks and the other soldiers who still could not see the threat developing on their flank. The insurgent began to raise the RPG to his shoulder, and Sarah realized that she was about to watch her teammates die. In less than 10 seconds, that rocket-propelled grenade would be fired directly into the center of the assault team. 7 American soldiers would be killed or severely wounded because they had refused to trust her eyes and judgment. Sarah made a decision that would define the rest of her military career. She could not wait for permission or confirmation from the ground team leaders. She could not allow her teammates to die because of their prejudice and skepticism. The time for proving herself through words and demonstrations had ended. Now she would prove herself through action. Sarah placed her finger on the trigger and centered her crosshairs on the insurgent with the RPG. The distance was just over 600 meters, which was well within her capabilities, but the shot would have to be perfect. There would be no time for a second attempt if she missed. The morning wind had picked up slightly, and Sarah calculated the necessary adjustments for bullet drop and drift. She controlled her breathing and waited for the natural pause between heartbeats that every sniper learns to recognize. In that moment of perfect stillness, Sarah squeezed the trigger and sent a single bullet racing across the desert toward a target who was about to kill her fellow soldiers. The first shot cracked across the desert valley like thunder breaking the morning silence. Sarah kept her eye pressed to the scope and watched as her bullet struck the insurgent with the RPG exactly where she had aimed. The man dropped instantly and the rocket launcher fell from his hands, clattering against the rocks beside him. But Sarah did not have time to celebrate her success. Through her scope, she could see the second insurgent reaching for the fallen RPG. He was moving quickly and would have the weapon ready to fire within seconds. Sarah worked the bolt of her rifle with practiced speed, chambering a fresh round while keeping the target area in her crosshairs. The second shot followed just 3 seconds after the first. Sarah watched as the bullet found its target, and the second insurgent collapsed beside his dead companion. The RPG that could have killed 7 American soldiers was now lying harmlessly among the desert rocks with no one left alive to operate it. The radio erupted in chaos as the assault team tried to understand what was happening. Contact, where did that come from? Brooks' voice was sharp with panic and confusion. The sound of rifle fire had shattered the carefully planned stealth approach, and now everyone was scrambling for cover. 2 targets eliminated, Sarah reported in a calm professional voice that cut through the radio chatter. The flanking force has been neutralized. Alpha Team, you now have a clear approach to the compound. She continued scanning the area through her scope, looking for any remaining threats. Through her scope, Sarah could see the 4 remaining insurgents from the flanking force running in different directions. They were no longer organized or coordinated and appeared to be fleeing toward the vehicles parked near the compound. Without their heavy weapons and leadership, the flanking attack had collapsed completely. Sarah provided real-time intelligence as the situation developed on the ground below her position. 2 hostiles moving toward the vehicle compound, she reported. 1 hostile approaching the main building from the west. 1 hostile appears to be wounded and taking cover behind the small storage building. The assault team had recovered from their initial shock and was now moving with purpose toward their objective. Sarah could see Brooks leading his men in a coordinated advance, using the confusion among the insurgents to their advantage. The mission was back on track thanks to her intervention. Alpha Leader, this is Overwatch, Sarah transmitted. You have clear fields of fire on all remaining exterior targets. The main building appears to have minimal security now. She watched as her teammates moved with the confidence of soldiers who knew they had reliable Overwatch support. Captain Williams' voice came through the radio, sounding amazed and perhaps slightly embarrassed. Outstanding shooting, Overwatch. How did you identify that flanking force when we could not see them from ground level? Sarah could hear a new tone of respect in his voice that had not been there during previous missions. Elevated. Position provides better observation angles, Sarah replied simply. She did not want to make the ground team feel worse about missing the threat. Her job was to provide support, not to make her teammates look incompetent even when their prejudice had nearly gotten them killed. Sarah continued to watch as the assault unfolded below her. The insurgents inside the main building were clearly aware that they were under attack, but they seemed disorganized and confused. Several men ran out of the building only to be engaged by the assault team that was now in perfect position. The entire firefight lasted less than 10 minutes. Without the surprise flanking attack and heavy weapon support, the insurgents were quickly overwhelmed by the superior training and coordination of the American soldiers. Ahmad Hassan was captured alive along with 2 of his senior lieutenants. Mission accomplished, Alpha Leader reported as the last shots echoed across the valley. High-value target is in custody, and we have recovered significant intelligence materials. The operation that could have ended in disaster had turned into a complete success. Sarah remained in her overwatch position for another 30 minutes, providing security while the assault teams conducted detailed searches of the compound buildings. She watched through her scope as documents and computer equipment were loaded into vehicles for transport back to the base. During the return journey, Sarah walked alone as usual, but the atmosphere was completely different from previous patrols. Instead of being ignored or excluded, she could feel the other soldiers watching her with something that looked very much like respect mixed with amazement. When they reached the base, Captain Williams called Sarah into his office for a private debriefing. She had never been invited to a one-on-one meeting with the company commander before, and she was not sure what to expect from the conversation. Martinez Williams began as soon as she had taken a seat across from his desk. Your performance today was exceptional. Those 2 shots saved the lives of at least 7 soldiers and possibly prevented the target from escaping. He paused and looked directly at her with eyes that showed genuine appreciation. Thank you, sir, Sarah replied, keeping her response short and professional. She did not want to appear boastful or overconfident, even though she felt enormous pride in what she had accomplished. I owe you an apology, Williams continued. I should have trusted your abilities from the beginning instead of allowing doubts and prejudices to influence my judgment. Your skills and dedication have been obvious since the day you arrived, but I was too concerned about unit cohesion to recognize your value. Sarah was surprised by the captain's honesty and willingness to admit his mistakes. Most commanding officers would never acknowledge that they had made errors in judgment, especially when it came to controversial topics like women in combat units. Sir, I understand the challenges of integrating new personnel into established units, Sarah said carefully. The important thing is that the mission was successful and everyone made it home safely. She wanted to be gracious in victory, rather than resentful about past treatment. Williams nodded and made notes in her personnel file. I am recommending you for a Bronze Star Medal for your actions today. Your quick thinking and exceptional marksmanship under pressure exemplify the highest standards of military service. He looked up from his writing and smiled for the first time since she had known him. When Sarah left the captain's office, she found Private Jackson waiting for her in the hallway. His young face was beaming with pride and excitement as he approached her. Corporal Martinez, he said with obvious enthusiasm. Everyone is talking about what you did out there today. Those were incredible shots. Thank you, Jackson, Sarah replied with a genuine smile. It feels good to finally contribute to the team in a meaningful way. She appreciated his continued support, especially since he had been her only ally during the difficult weeks of isolation and rejection. Word about the mission spread quickly through the entire base. By evening, everyone had heard the story of how the female sniper had saved Alpha Company with 2 perfect shots at over 600 meters. The same men who had mocked her arrival were now discussing her marksmanship with obvious admiration. That night at dinner, something unprecedented happened. Sergeant Thompson approached Sarah's table carrying his meal tray and asked if he could sit with her. Behind him came 3 other soldiers who had never spoken to her before, including one of the men who had made jokes about playing house on her first day. Mind if we join you, Corporal Thompson asked, with what appeared to be genuine respect rather than mockery. Sarah looked up at the 4 men standing beside her table and felt a surge of emotion that she had to fight to control. Of course, Sarah replied as calmly as she could manage. There is plenty of room. As the men sat down around her table, Sarah realized that something fundamental had changed in her relationship with the unit. The mockery and isolation had ended with 2 rifle shots fired in defense of the very men who had rejected her. The conversation that followed was unlike any she had experienced since joining Alpha Company. Instead of being excluded from discussions about tactics and combat experience, she found herself at the center of detailed questions about long-range shooting, techniques, and target identification procedures. For the first time since arriving at the base, Sarah Martinez was not eating dinner alone. The respect she had earned through months of dedication and 2 moments of perfect marksmanship had finally broken down the barriers that had separated her from her fellow soldiers. 3 days after the successful capture of Ahmad Hassan, the formal ceremony took place at the main parade ground of the base. Sarah stood at attention in her dress uniform as Captain Williams read the citation for her Bronze Star Medal. The entire Alpha Company was assembled in formation, watching as their female teammate received one of the military's highest honors for courage in combat, for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action against an armed enemy. Williams read from the official document. Corporal Martinez displayed exceptional courage, skill, and judgment under fire that directly resulted in the successful completion of a critical mission and the preservation of American lives. Sarah felt the weight of the bronze medal as Williams pinned it to her uniform. The same men who had questioned her abilities and excluded her from their brotherhood were now saluting her achievement. The irony was not lost on her that it had taken saving their lives for them to finally see her as an equal. After the ceremony, Sergeant Brooks approached Sarah in a way that she had never seen before. His usual arrogance and hostility had been replaced by something that looked like genuine humility and respect. He stopped directly in front of her and spoke in a voice that only she could hear. Martinez, Brooks said quietly while glancing around to make sure they had privacy. "I owe you my life and the lives of 6 other good soldiers. What you did out there 3 days ago was the finest piece of soldiering I have ever witnessed." He paused and took a deep breath before continuing. "I was wrong about you," Brooks continued with obvious difficulty. "Dead wrong about everything. I let my prejudices cloud my judgment, and it almost got me and my men killed. If you had not been watching our backs with those eagle eyes of yours, we would all be going home in boxes right now." Sarah could see that this admission was extremely difficult for Brooks to make. He was a proud man who did not like acknowledging mistakes or showing vulnerability in front of others. But the near-death experience had clearly shaken him to his core and forced him to examine his own biases. "Sergeant, we are all on the same team," Sarah replied diplomatically. "What matters is that everyone made it home alive and the mission was successful." She chose her words carefully because she did not want to make Brooks feel worse about his previous treatment of her. Brooks nodded and extended his hand for a handshake. Sarah took his hand and felt the firm grip of a soldier who finally recognized her as a fellow warrior. The handshake lasted several seconds longer than necessary, as if Brooks was trying to communicate everything he could not put into words. That evening brought another significant change in Sarah's daily routine. Instead of sitting alone at dinner, she found herself surrounded by soldiers who wanted to hear details about the shooting and learn from her expertise. Private Jackson sat beside her, beaming with pride like a younger brother watching his sister receive recognition. "Tell us about that second shot," Thompson said as he leaned forward across the table. "How did you adjust your aim so quickly after the first target went down?" The question came from genuine curiosity rather than skepticism, and Sarah found herself enjoying the technical discussion. "The key is maintaining situational awareness even after engaging your primary target," Sarah explained. "You cannot celebrate or relax after one successful shot, because threats often work in pairs or small groups. I kept scanning the area and saw the second insurgent reaching for the fallen RPG." Sarah described her shooting technique and the mental calculations involved in making rapid follow-up shots at long range. The soldiers listened intently and asked intelligent questions about wind compensation, bullet drop, and target identification. For the first time since joining the unit, Sarah felt like her knowledge and experience were being valued. The conversation continued for over an hour, as more soldiers joined the discussion. Men who had never spoken to her before were now seeking her advice about improving their own marksmanship skills. Sarah found herself offering to conduct training sessions and share techniques that had taken her years to develop. Word of Sarah's heroism spread far beyond Alpha Company within just a few days. Soldiers from other units would point her out when she walked around the base and whispered to each other about the female sniper who had saved an entire assault team with 2 impossible shots. The story grew slightly with each telling, but the core facts remained the same. Captain Williams submitted a detailed report about the mission that eventually reached division headquarters and beyond. Sarah's actions were cited as an example of exceptional individual performance under extreme pressure. Military publications wrote articles about the engagement, and Sarah found herself receiving letters from female soldiers around the world. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source 2 weeks after the medal ceremony. Sarah was cleaning her rifle in the armory when she heard someone enter behind her. She turned around to find Ahmad Hassan's former second-in-command, who had been captured during the raid. The insurgent was being held at the base for questioning before being transferred to a detention facility. He had specifically requested to meet the American sniper, who had eliminated the flanking force. Through an interpreter, he spoke directly to Sarah with what appeared to be professional respect. "You are a very skilled warrior," he said through the translator. "My men were experienced fighters who had killed many Americans before. But you saw them when your own soldiers could not, and you shot with the accuracy of a machine. We underestimated the abilities of your female soldiers." Sarah was surprised by the enemy fighters' acknowledgement of her skills. Even the insurgents who had been trying to kill her teammates recognized the exceptional nature of her performance. It was validation from the most unlikely source possible. As the weeks passed, Sarah noticed that her entire experience at the base had fundamentally changed. She was no longer the outsider trying to prove herself worthy of acceptance. Instead, she had become the veteran that newer soldiers looked up to for guidance and leadership. Young replacements arriving at the base would seek her out for advice about combat tactics and mental preparation. Sarah found herself mentoring soldiers just as older veterans had mentored her during her early career. The cycle of knowledge and experience was continuing with her as a link in the chain. The mockery and isolation that had defined her first 3 months at the base became a distant memory. Sarah was now included in all planning discussions, and her tactical recommendations were not only heard, but actively sought out by the command staff. She had earned her place at the table through demonstrated competence under fire. During quiet moments, Sarah would sometimes reflect on the journey that had brought her to this point. The months of eating alone and enduring constant skepticism had been painful, but they had also made her stronger and more determined. She had learned that respect could not be demanded or given freely. It had to be earned through actions when the stakes were highest. Sarah Martinez had proven that courage, skill, and dedication transcended gender when lives hung in the balance. 2 shots fired in a moment of crisis had not only saved her teammates, but had changed the way an entire unit thought about women in combat. The female sniper who had once been mocked and excluded was now recognized as one of the finest soldiers any of them had ever served alongside. The story of those 2 shots would be told and retold for years to come in military circles around the world. But for Sarah, the greatest victory was not the medal or the recognition. It was the simple fact that she no longer ate dinner alone. She had finally found her place among warriors who judged her not by her gender, but by her ability to deliver when it mattered most. The battle for acceptance had been won with precision marksmanship and unwavering professionalism. Sarah had silenced the doubters with 2 perfect shots that proved beyond question that she belonged exactly where she was.